everyone, and we return with the Hey Legal quiz, an extremely popular feature for Hey Legal. And what better way to do that than with our first guest on this new quiz, Joshua Rozenberg, honorary KC, Britain's best known legal commentator. Good morning, Joshua.
Good morning, Edith.
It's lovely to have you on, and we're very grateful that you've agreed to take our quiz.
It's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to it.
As am I. So shall we get started then? We have a number of questions to put to you, and you're kindly going to answer those. So if we just start at the beginning, and our first question for you is, if you weren't a solicitor or legal journalist, what would you be? If you hadn't gone into law, what would you have done?
I think I would have become a barrister, so I would have stayed within the law. When I had to consider my career prospect at university, I thought that the people I was studying with, who all went to the Bar of England and Wales, were pretty high-powered lawyers. I thought I was quite good at running an office, administering things, organizing things, but I didn't think of myself as a high-powered lawyer, and so I went into the solicitors branch of the profession. I'm not suggesting for a moment that solicitors aren't high-powered, but in the little suburban firm outside London where I trained, some of them were not of the most sophisticated in the world. I think I would have preferred to be a barrister. I think I would have preferred to be self-employed, as you are, as advocates are in Scotland, and to take my chances. But in those days, I thought I ought to play safe.
And any particular branch of that? I don't know how it differs, particularly with barristers and advocates, but any area of law that you would have been particularly interested in doing?
I don't think I could have coped with the most demanding areas of commercial law. I like public law, administrative law, judicial review. I might have ended up at the criminal bar, I suppose, doing knockabout trials. I don't really know. I mean, you do tend to specialise in England and Wales, but you can move from one thing to another. But I do find public law the most interesting aspect of the law.
All right. Well, thank you for that. So moving on, what was your first job, and what would you say you learned from it?
I did a holiday job nearly 60 years ago in 1965. I worked for a company that handled football pools. You're too young to remember football pools, but the idea was that people would bet on the results of football matches on a Saturday, and there was some complicated way in which they sent in small sums of money, and one or two people became millionaires. And I worked for a man called Lou Cohen, and he told me at the time that his daughter was a lawyer. He was very proud of his daughter, and fathers are often proud of their daughters if they're going into the law at that stage. And I was only 15, and I nodded politely and said, "I'm sure she'll do very well." Anyway, a little later on, in fact, quite a lot later on, she became the most senior judge in the world. She became president of the International Court of Justice. I'm talking about Dame Rosalind Higgins. So I think the lesson that I learnt from that is when people tell you that their daughters are going to do well in the law, well, one should believe them.
Absolutely. Wow, that's amazing. All right. And third question, Joshua, is who is or was your most inspiring colleague or colleagues?
She's a journalist called Jane Peel. She worked with me when I was at the BBC covering legal affairs, and I hugely admired her. She had skills which I didn't have. First of all, she could type, which I've never learnt to do. Secondly, she had seriously good shorthand, which is, again, something I never mastered. She didn't take a degree, which in those days was becoming quite unusual in terms of journalism. Everybody gets a university degree nowadays. But she was an absolutely terrific journalist and a really nice person. She's still around. She gave it all up. She wasn't a legal specialist, but she ended up specializing in legal affairs alongside me. She learned it all very quickly, was a terrific broadcaster, and now enjoys herself, works in public relations and so on. But she was a great colleague to have.
That's great that you've got those memories of her and how inspiring she was. or is, should I say. Question 4, Joshua, is if I were to say to you, or to say to some people who know you, give me 3 adjectives that best describe Joshua, what would I hear?
Tall, dark and handsome, but that's of course because people know me for my voice. They knew me as a voice on the radio. In fact, they didn't always recognise my voice. When I was working for BBC Radio, I went to a party one evening. It was a fairly noisy party, and I bumped into somebody I'd never met before. And we were discussing the news of the day, and she said rather accusingly to me, but Rozenberg said that on the radio, as if I just heard it on the radio and was just repeating what I'd heard. So I had to say, well, I'm Rozenberg. But if you want a slightly more immodest answer, then I suppose I can give you some quotations. You said I was an honorary King's Counsel, and the Minister of Justice in London said I'd been nominated for my work as the preeminent legal analyst of modern times, which is a bit hyperbolic. The Lady Chief Justice of England and Wales said the other day that the fact that I could express things so clearly with such acumen was quite extraordinary. And she also spoke of my sheer integrity, which is again very immodest, but it's something I'm proud of. And the Lord Chancellor said in Parliament at the end of last month, when I stopped doing my Radio 4 programme, Law in Action, the BBC stopped producing it, that I had made a profound and important contribution to our country. Alex Chalk said my blog, Lawyer Rights, was required reading, and I read him most days. So there you are. You asked what people said. That's what they said.
Absolutely. Fantastic. And I have seen those quotes myself. So yes, why be modest when people are saying such wonderful things? And, you know, that's a great thing, a great answer to that question, certainly.